What is up, guys? Welcome back to another GeekaWhat video, and today it's time for an RTX 3080 build guide with this MSI's Gaming X Trio card. I'm going to take you through the whole build process step by step today, showing you how it's done, before booting this machine up to see exactly how it performs in some of the most popular titles. So let's dive into it. But first, a quick word from today's video sponsor. Ebuyer are your one-stop shop for all your PC component needs here in the UK. Check out the UK links to all the components listed today at ebuyer.com in the description below, including their entire lineup of RTX 3080 graphics cards, just like this one. Their in-house brand AlphaSync also has a range of full 3080 systems that you can buy right now. Check them out at the link in the description below. We're going to kick today's build off by installing up our motherboard assembly. This basically involves installing the RAM, the M.2 SSD and any CPU cooler brackets up to the motherboard before actually putting this into our case today. Specifically, this is from MSI, it's their Z490 Ace board. This motherboard's pretty high end, so you can go for some cheaper options, but with plenty of M.2 slots, support for all the latest Intel desktop CPUs, and overall a really nice aesthetic. It's going to work great for today's build. Now, as ever, I'm going to use the motherboard box as a really convenient anti-static workbench. First up, we're going to install the CPU, pull up that retention arm, and then place the socket on the top heatsink. Into the socket, I'm going to install our CPU choice today. With 6 cores and 12 threads, and a boost clock of up to 4.8 GHz, this Core i5 10600K is a great choice today. I have done a Ryzen build if that's more your thing, and you can go and check that out in the card section here. Align the gold triangle on your CPU with the bottom left corner of your socket. We're then going to drop the processor nicely into place before popping that retention arm down. And whatever you do, don't throw this one away. The next step today then is to install our RAM or our memory. I'd recommend either a 16GB or 32GB kit for this build. If you want to do a bit of editing, bit of live streaming, go for the higher number. If all you're bothered about is gaming, and 16GB is going to work fine. Align the notch on your RAM DIMM slot with the corresponding notch on your motherboard. With the retention clips pulled back, we can then easily slide the RAM down, applying even pressure to both sides. I really like the aesthetic of this ADATA Spectrix D60G kit. It's got loads of RGB and it's also pretty good value. Now, talking of RGB, I've also picked up an RGB M.2 drive. Don't worry, it is also NVMe and all that jazz, so it's going to be nice and quick today. To install this, I need to remove the M.2 heatsink, located kind of midway down our motherboard. And because this is an RGB drive, I'm not actually going to put this back into place. This is the ADATA Spectrix S40G and is available in like 500GB and 1TB capacities. Line the little notch on the M.2 slot with kind of the corresponding slot on the motherboard before finally screwing it into place just like so. Now, that actually leads us nicely on to our case choice today. This is from MSI, who, believe it or not, actually make computer cases now, which is pretty cool. This is their Sakura 100R, and I thought the feature set looked pretty good, so let's give it a go and find out if it really cuts the mustard, so to speak. Okay, so to take the side panel off, you have to remove the top cover. I mean, it's kind of cool, it's a bit different. Now, aside from those little oddities, we've got 4 addressable RGB fans, which are going to look great. Actually, a decent bit of airflow clearance at the front, and all the other features you'd expect from a high-end case. Now, inside the case at the rear, you'll find this bag of included screws and accessories. And just quickly check that all the right motherboard standoffs are installed. In our case, they're already in the right place. This is going to allow us to slide the motherboard into place with the I/O shield going through the rear of the case. And we're going to screw it down with these included screws from a second ago. Okay then, with that all installed, next up it's CPU cooler time. MSI actually sent me their new 360mm AIO. I wasn't really planning on using this in a video at first, but after seeing its price point and its feature set and some of the reviews so far, it looks like a really great bet. The really big 360mm radiator should also be really nice and quiet today. I've never seen this before. They've actually built the pump into the middle of the radiator, which they're saying should be like really, really quiet and keeps the size of the actual water block as small as possible. First things first then, we need to remove the front 3 fans so that we can actually use some slightly longer screws and secure the radiator to them. Pause. We need to remove the hard drive cage from the bottom of the case in order to make enough room for the radiator. Now I'm going to do this in stages, basically remove 2 of the short screws and replace them with the longer screws, 1 row at a time, and this will keep everything as easy and contained as possible. All we then need to do is fasten the water block down to our CPU. We're going to use this bracket here and slide it on just like so. We've also got this little back plate, which with these screws is going to go through the back of the motherboard. And then slide these plastic stoppers through to stop the back plate basically falling off. Little bit of thermal paste. Did a messy job of that, but it'll be fine. It'll all be fine. These screws are actually really cool. They're kind of like spring-loaded. Just make sure you tighten them up as much as possible. Next up then today, and the final bit of work before we install the graphics card, which I'm genuinely so excited for, is to install the front panel cables. These power the ports and the buttons on the very fancy I/O actually on the top of this chassis. First up today is our HD audio cable. This goes to the bottom left of the motherboard and has a pin blocked out, so will only go in one way around. Next up is our JFP1 connectors. These are by far the fiddliest of the bunch and make the power and reset and hard drive indicator LEDs work. I'll pop a diagram on your screen now to try and make this as easy as possible. And then finally today we've got our 2 USBs. First is our USB 3.0. This is our Type A ports on the top of the motherboard, and as you can see here we've got 1 cable for each port. It's notched, so do be a bit careful. Finally then we've got the USB-C connector, so that's USB 3 Gen 2 Type C. Very catchy name, and that is a little bit more delicate, so just be careful, it's a bit less flexible, and just goes in like so. With those cables out the way, we can finally go ahead and install the graphics card. Now this is of course the MSI Gaming X RTX 3080. This is an absolute beast. It's got 3 8-pin GPU power connectors. These massive 3 GPU fans, I mean, they are huge. And really, what I'd class as a 2.5, maybe a 3-slot design. Oh, and also a bit of RGB because, you know, it needs to look sick, of course. To install this, we need to remove this black metal cover that's kind of hiding the PCIe slots. Before then, removing the second and third PCIe slots themselves, and keep hold of the screws because these are going to fasten the graphics card down in just a second. Make sure that you remove the black plastic PCIe cover, push back the PCIe clip on the motherboard, and then slide the graphics card very carefully into place. What an absolute beast. I mean, it just about fits. It looks great, but it just about fits. Which means we can finally get it secured down into place and pop the PCIe slot cover back on just like so. Finally then today, the last kind of major step before we boot this machine up to see kind of how it looks, but more importantly how it performs, is to install the power supply. I've gone for an 850 watt, 80 plus gold unit from Thermaltake. It's got an RGB fan on the bottom, which is kind of a cool added bonus, and a fully modular interface, meaning you only plug in the cables that you need, which in today's build is quite a lot. All the cables come nicely packaged in this kind of portable bag. And from this, we're going to need a SATA power cable. We're going to need the biggest cable of the bunch, the 24-pin motherboard power cable. Not 1, but actually 2 8-pin CPU power connectors. As well as finally, not 1, not 2, but 3 6+2-pin GPU power connectors. And they tend to come in harnesses of 2. And then we're just going to plug the cables up in the following order. First are our 2 4+4-pin CPU power connectors, and these go to the top left of the motherboard. Next up is our 24-pin motherboard power connector, goes to the right-hand side of the board, just like so. It's the biggest one of the bunch, and it's, you know, it's not an easy one to get confused. Finally then, we've got the 3 6+2-pin GPU power cables. Nearly struggled with that one, and these go to the graphics card just like so. Work through one at a time, and you should have a spare one left over, so don't worry about that. So then, that is looking a bit insane with all those power connectors. We've got a couple of fans left over from the radiator box, so I'm going to just whack a pair in the top for even more airflow and keep this system nice and cool. Once I've done that though, let's boot this thing up and see how it performs. But first, how it looks when it's all powered up. Roll the montage. Okay then, now you've seen just how good this system looks when it's all powered up, let's take a dive and see exactly how it performs. I've tested it with some of the latest, most demanding and most popular titles to give you a really even picture. The first game that I benchmarked today was GTA 5, a little bit on the older side now, granted, but still hugely popular and a great performance benchmark. At 4K high settings with the render bars set to about halfway, using the game's inbuilt benchmarking mode, you're looking at an average of 111 frames per second, with a 90th and 99th percentile result of 99 and 87 frames per second respectively. These are some really fantastic results, and the game visually looked pretty stunning in my view. The next title that I tested out today is Apex Legends. I listened to your guys' feedback from the last video, knocked the resolution down from 4K to 1440p, but kept the high settings for the really tasty visual experience. And here we're seeing an average of 144 FPS, with a 90th percentile result of 124 and a 99th of 102. That means the game is never really going below 102 frames per second, which provides a really smooth, kind of almost esports level frame rate at really nice visual settings. Next up is Call of Duty's Warzone, of course the free Battle Royale mode in Call of Duty that's taken the world by storm. Here at 4K high settings with of course ray tracing disabled because it doesn't actually do anything in the free Warzone mode, you're looking at an average of 104 frames per second with a 90th percentile result of 93 and a 99th of 74. Visually the game looks absolutely fantastic. I think the actual gun and shooting dynamics of Call of Duty's Warzone are pretty unparalleled, and it has the frame rate and visual experience to match. Next up then today we've got a little bit of Forza Horizon 4 here at 4K ultra settings using the game's inbuilt benchmarking mode. Once again you're looking at an average frames per second of 139 with a 90th percentile result of 134 and a 99th percentile of 129. Visually this game is incredible, and to get these kind of frame rates in a racing game is just the most ludicrously overkill thing ever. Racing games on consoles tend to run around the 45 to 55 frames per second mark, sometimes dropping as low as 30, so to get 141 is providing a superb experience on this system. Overwatch is next up today then, kind of like Apex Legends in the sense it's a little bit easier to run but is still massively popular. And at 4K ultra settings, pretty much everything to the max with of course VSync disabled and 100% 4K resolution, you're looking at an average frames per second of 245. That is insane. You cannot possibly need any more frames per second than that. And of course the 90th and 99th percentile results were also really good at 221 and 192 respectively. Visually the game looks great, it's super fun and there's no performance issues on this machine. I've also got to say a quick thanks to MSI for hooking me up with this monitor so I can test all the games today at not only 1080 and 1440p but also 4K, and I'll link this in the description below alongside their new GK50 Elite keyboard, which is the follow-up to the GK50 which I've been using on my desk daily since it came out. It's a really nice low-profile mechanical keyboard and I'll pop both of these in the description below. Next up then today is CSGO, pretty easy to run but still really popular, and here you're looking 315 frames per second on average. That was tested offline with bots, which means your performance in the real world might actually be slightly higher because the PC isn't having to generate the action of said bots. Either way though, 315 FPS is it's not to be sniffed at. At 4K ultra settings, they are some truly insane frame rates. Next up on the list today is a bit of Battlefield 5. Really, should test the ray tracing muscles of this card, and Battlefield 5 is a great way to do that. When it first came out, it was kind of the first ray tracing mainstream title out there, and the RTX cards really struggled to run it. Well, not anymore. 4K high settings with RTX and DLSS enabled. DLSS, of course, using AI to kind of render the game out at a lower resolution and upscale it for even more frame rate. You're looking 81 FPS on average, 73 for the 90th percentile, and 70 for the 99th. For good measure, I also tested it out at 1440p high, otherwise identical settings with RTX and DLSS enabled, just on the off chance that those frame rates aren't quite high enough. Here you're looking at 105 FPS on average, bumping up to 94 for the 90th percentile and 77 for the 99th. Lastly then today, the very final game on the list, I've tested out Fortnite, and do hold tight because I've done a couple of kind of settings variations for you RTX lovers and haters out there. First up is 1440p high settings with RTX disabled and DLSS set to balanced. Here you're seeing an average frames per second of, wait for it, 245 frames per second, with a 90 and 99th percentile of 207 and 165. And what that means is that the game is very, very rarely going below 165 FPS, and most of the time is around the 230-245 mark. If you do want a bit of ray tracing though, let's bang up DLSS to performance mode, bop ray tracing on, and at 1440p high settings, you're looking at 107 FPS on average, with 88 and 77 for those 90th and 99th percentiles. That means if you want, a really good visual experience but the highest possible frame rate, it's got you covered. And if you want it to look a bit more snazzy, use those reflections and all that kind of stuff, you can still get over 100 FPS on average. With that being said though, that pretty much wraps it up for not only the benchmark section, but the whole video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to give it a big old like rating, get subscribed for more from me. But as always, we'll see you in the next one.